The blood on her dress had dried to a rust-brown stain. By the time Victoria Ellis stumbled into Quartz Hill, California, her eyes fixed on the dust-covered boards beneath her feet, as if looking up might shatter what remained of her composure. The September sun of 1878 beat down mercilessly on the small mining town, and she felt every curious gaze burning into her skin as she made her way past the saloon, the general store, the blacksmith's forge where hammer strikes rang out like gunshots that made her flinch. She had been walking for 3 days straight, her worn boots developing holes that let in sand and stones, her throat so parched she could barely swallow. The stagecoach robbery had taken everything: her parents, her older brother, the life she had known in Sacramento, where her father had run a successful dry goods business. The outlaws had left her alive, though she sometimes wished in her darkest moments they had not shown that mercy. Being the sole survivor meant carrying the weight of all those deaths, meant seeing their faces every time she closed her eyes, meant existing in a world that suddenly felt hollow and cold despite the California heat. A hand touched her elbow gently, and she jerked away so violently she nearly fell. Her gaze remained locked on the ground, on the shadow of the man who had approached her, tall and broad-shouldered against the afternoon sun. "Easy now, miss. I did not mean to startle you." His voice was deep and calm, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. "You look like you could use some water and a place to rest. My name is Owen Morgan. I work the ranch just outside town." Victoria's lips trembled as she tried to form words, her eyes tracking the movements of his boots as he shifted his weight. Brown leather, well worn but cared for, with spurs that jingled softly. She could see his shadow tipping his hat back, and she imagined he was studying her face, trying to understand what had happened to her. "I can't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't look at you. I can't look at anyone." There was a pause, and she braced herself for him to walk away, to dismiss her as mad or broken or too much trouble. Instead, she heard the rustle of fabric as he crouched down, bringing himself lower, though she still could not bring herself to lift her gaze beyond his knees. "Take your time," Owen said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I will wait until you are ready to look." Those words, simple as they were, cracked something inside her chest. No one had offered her patience since that terrible day. The sheriff who found her had demanded immediate answers. The doctor who examined her had grown frustrated with her silence. The distant aunt she had tried to reach in San Francisco had sent a telegram saying she could not take in a traumatized girl with no prospects. Everyone wanted her to be normal, to be whole, to look them in the eye and pretend the world had not ended. "There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Chen," Owen continued, his voice steady and unhurried. "She is a kind woman. She will give you a room and ask no questions. Let me take you there." Victoria managed a tiny nod, and she heard him rise to his feet. He did not touch her again, but she could sense him beside her, matching his pace to her halting steps as they made their way down the main street. She kept her eyes on the ground, watching his boots move in her peripheral vision, focusing on that simple rhythm to keep from falling apart entirely. The boarding house was a 2-story building with a wide porch, painted white though the color had faded under years of sun and wind. Owen knocked on the door, and when it opened, Victoria heard a woman's voice, accented but clear. "Owen Morgan, what brings you to town in the middle of the week?" "Mrs. Chen, this young lady needs a room and some kindness. I will cover her board for the month." "That is not necessary," Victoria forced out, still staring at the porch boards. "I have some money. They did not find it all." She fumbled with the hidden pocket sewn into her petticoat, pulling out the crumpled bills she had managed to conceal. Her mother had insisted on that secret pocket, had sewn it herself, saying a woman should always have emergency funds. The memory of her mother's careful stitches made Victoria's vision blur with tears. Mrs. Chen's small hand entered her line of sight, gently closing around the money. "You keep this for now. Come inside, child. You look ready to collapse." The interior of the boarding house was cool and dim, a relief after the harsh sunlight. Victoria heard Owen's footsteps pause at the threshold. "Will you be all right?" he asked. She nodded, still not looking up, not trusting herself to speak. "I will come by tomorrow to check on you, if that is acceptable." Another nod. "Take your time," he said again, and then his footsteps retreated down the porch steps, and she heard the jingle of spurs fading into the distance. Mrs. Chen led her upstairs to a small room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. The older woman brought up a pitcher of water and a basin, along with a simple gray dress. "Burn that one you are wearing," Mrs. Chen said, matter-of-factly, gesturing to Victoria's blood-stained traveling dress. "Some things cannot be washed clean. Better to start fresh." Victoria wanted to protest that it was one of only 2 dresses she had left, but she knew the woman was right. She could not bear to wear it another moment. After Mrs. Chen left, she stripped off the ruined dress, scrubbed her skin until it was raw and pink, and pulled on the gray cotton dress that smelled of soap and sunshine. She buried her old dress in the bottom of the trunk at the foot of the bed, unable to burn it yet, but needing it out of sight. That night, she lay awake listening to the sounds of the town settling into darkness. Somewhere, a piano played, badly. Dogs barked, men's voices rose and fell in conversation. Normal sounds, everyday sounds. Sounds that belonged to a world where people still lived and laughed and made plans for tomorrow. She felt separated from all of it by a pane of glass she could not break through. Owen Morgan came the next day, just as he had promised. Victoria heard his knock from where she sat in the small chair by the window, and she tensed as Mrs. Chen's voice called up the stairs. "Miss Ellis, you have a visitor." She made her way downstairs slowly, her eyes on each step, counting them to keep her mind occupied. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When she reached the bottom, she could see Owen's boots in the doorway, and beside them, a pair of smaller boots, a child's boots. "I hope you do not mind," Owen said. "I brought my niece Clara. She is 7 years old and talks enough for 3 people, so you will not have to say much." "Hello," a bright voice piped up. "Uncle Owen says you are new in town and might like some company. I brought my favorite book. Do you like stories? I love stories. Mrs. Patterson at the schoolhouse says I read very well for my age." Despite everything, Victoria felt the corner of her mouth twitch. She looked down at the little girl's boots, scuffed and dusty, one lace tied in a crooked bow. "She is not much for eye contact either," Owen said, and Victoria heard the smile in his voice. "Too busy looking at everything else. Last week she stared at a beetle for near an hour." "It was a very interesting beetle," Clara said defensively. "It had spots." "Would you like to sit on the porch?" Owen asked. "It is a nice morning, not too hot yet." Victoria nodded and followed them outside. Mrs. Chen brought out a chair, and Victoria sat, while Clara settled on the porch steps and immediately began reading aloud from her book, a collection of fairy tales. Owen leaned against the porch railing, one boot propped on the lower rail, and did not say much, just listened to his niece's animated reading. Victoria kept her gaze on her hands folded in her lap, but she listened too. Clara's voice was like music, rising and falling with the drama of each story, and for brief moments, Victoria could almost forget the darkness that lived inside her now. When Clara finished a particularly exciting tale about a princess and a dragon, she looked up at Victoria expectantly. "Did you like it?" "Yes," Victoria managed. "You read very well." "See, Uncle Owen, I told you she would like it." Clara beamed with pride. "We can come back tomorrow if you want. I have more books." They did come back the next day, and the day after that. Each visit was the same easy pattern. Clara would read or chatter about her day at school or the antics of the ranch dogs, and Owen would stand nearby, a quiet, steady presence that demanded nothing. Sometimes he would comment on Clara's stories, or mention something happening in town, his voice low and unhurried. Victoria rarely spoke, but she began to look forward to their visits, to the way they filled the hollow hours. On the 4th day, Owen came alone. Victoria heard the difference in his footsteps, missing the lighter tread of Clara's boots. "She is at school," he explained as Victoria settled into her usual chair. "I hope you do not mind just my company. I know I am not as entertaining as a 7-year-old with an imagination." "I do not mind," Victoria said quietly. They sat in silence for a while, and it was not uncomfortable. Victoria watched a dust devil spin down the main street, picking up dry leaves and bits of paper. She could feel Owen looking at her, but not in the way other people did, not with pity or curiosity or impatience. He just looked, accepting her as she was. "Can I tell you something?" he asked eventually. She nodded. "My brother, Clara's father, died 2 years ago. Mining accident. He went to work one morning, same as always, and he never came home. My sister-in-law, she could not stay here after that. Every street, every building reminded her of him. She moved back east to her family, but Clara wanted to stay with me. She loves the ranch, loves the horses and the open space. He paused. What I am trying to say is, I know something about grief, about how it changes you, how it makes the world feel different. Victoria's throat tightened. I cannot stop seeing it, she whispered. Every time I close my eyes, every time I see a stranger's face, I cannot look at people because all I see is them. My mother, my father, my brother. The way they looked after. So you look down, Owen said simply. That is all right. There is no shame in protecting yourself. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. Everyone else wants me to be normal, to get over it, to move on. Then everyone else can mind their own business. There was a fierce edge to his voice now. You take whatever time you need. There is no schedule for healing. Those words, that fierce defense of her right to be broken, undid her. She put her face in her hands and sobbed, all the tears she had been holding back pouring out. She cried for her parents, for her brother, for the life she had lost, for the girl she used to be, who could look people in the eye and smile and believe the world was a safe place. Owen did not try to comfort her with touch or platitudes. He just waited, and when her tears finally subsided, he handed her a clean handkerchief. Thank you, she said, her voice hoarse. Keep it, I have others. After that day, something shifted between them. Victoria began to talk more, to share small pieces of what had happened, though she could never tell the whole story all at once. It came out in fragments, the way the stagecoach had lurched to a stop, the sound of gunfire, her mother pushing her down behind the seat, the terrible silence after. Owen listened to every fragment, never pressing for more, never acting shocked or horrified. He just accepted each piece she offered and held it with care. And slowly, so slowly Victoria barely noticed at first, she began to heal. The nightmares came less frequently. The panic that gripped her chest loosened its hold. She started to notice things again. The way the morning light turned the hills golden, the scent of bread baking at the bakery, the sound of laughter from the saloon. She still could not look at faces, but she began to venture out more. She would walk to the general store, eyes on the ground, and buy small supplies. She helped Mrs. Chen with light chores around the boarding house. She even attended church one Sunday, sitting in the back pew with her head bowed, listening to the hymns. Owen and Clara continued their visits, and Victoria found herself waiting for those moments, with an anticipation that felt almost like happiness. Clara had decided Victoria was her special friend and brought her wildflowers, interesting rocks, and a never-ending stream of stories. Owen brought news of the ranch, descriptions of the horses he was training, accounts of town gossip delivered with dry humor that made Victoria smile despite herself. 3 months after her arrival in Quartz Hill, Owen invited her to visit the ranch. Victoria's immediate instinct was to refuse, to say it was too much, too soon. But another part of her, a part that was slowly waking up, wanted to go, wanted to see the place Owen described with such obvious love. Clara will be there, he added, and my ranch hands are good men who will keep their distance if you prefer. You would not have to talk to anyone. I just thought you might enjoy seeing something beyond the town. All right, Victoria said, surprising herself. The ranch was an hour's ride from Quartz Hill, and Owen arrived with a gentle mare named Daisy and a patient expression that told Victoria he would wait however long it took for her to feel comfortable. Mounting the horse was awkward, her skills rusty from years of city life, but once she was settled, the rhythm of riding came back to her. She kept her eyes on Daisy's mane, on the saddle horn, on the trail stretching ahead. The Morgan ranch sprawled across a valley between 2 low hills, with a main house built of wood and stone, a large barn, several corrals, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Clara came running out as soon as they arrived, her braids flying behind her. You came. Uncle Owen said you might not be ready, but I knew you would come. Wait until you see the new foal. He is brown with white socks and the longest legs you ever saw. Victoria let Clara pull her toward the barn, still looking at the ground, but feeling the warmth of the sun on her shoulders and the dry sweetness of hay in the air. The barn was dim and cool, with dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that came through gaps in the walls. Clara led her to a stall where a mare stood protectively beside a gangly foal that could not have been more than a week old. Is he not beautiful? Clara whispered, as if afraid to startle the animals. He is, Victoria agreed softly. They spent the afternoon at the ranch, and Victoria found herself relaxing in a way she had not since before the attack. There was something peaceful about the animals, about their simple presence. They did not care if she looked at them or not. They did not expect anything from her. She sat on a fence rail and watched Owen work with a young horse in the corral, his movements sure and patient. He talked to the animal in a low, steady voice, the same voice he used with her, and she understood then that patience was simply part of who he was. The ranch hands nodded politely when Owen introduced them, but kept their distance as promised. Victoria caught glimpses of them working, mending fences, hauling water, going about their daily tasks. Normal life, continuing despite tragedy and loss. The world kept turning. People kept working and living and finding reasons to smile. It was both comforting and slightly painful. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Owen brought out a simple supper. They ate on the porch of the main house, and for the first time since arriving in Quartz Hill, Victoria felt hungry in a real way, not just eating because she knew she should. The food was plain but good, bread and cheese and cold chicken, and she cleaned her plate. "You can come back any time," Owen said as he prepared to ride her back to town. "The ranch is always here, and you are always welcome." "Thank you," Victoria said, "for everything, for your patience, for not giving up on me. I told you I would wait," he said simply. "I meant it." The visits to the ranch became regular after that. Twice a week, weather permitting, Owen would come to town and they would ride out together. Sometimes Clara joined them, sometimes she had school or other obligations. On those days when it was just the two of them, they would talk. Owen told her about growing up in Texas, about coming to California to start fresh after his brother died, about the challenges and rewards of ranch life. Victoria told him about her childhood in Sacramento, about helping in her father's store, about her dreams of becoming a teacher before everything changed. "You could still teach," Owen said one day as they sat on the porch watching the horses graze in the pasture. "Mrs. Patterson at the school is getting older. She mentioned wanting an assistant." "I could not," Victoria said automatically. "How could I teach children when I cannot even look at them?" "Clara does not seem to mind." "Clara is different. Maybe, or maybe you are stronger than you think." The idea took root despite her doubts. Teaching had been her dream once, and the thought of reclaiming even a piece of her old aspirations was tempting. But the reality of standing in front of a classroom, of having dozens of eyes on her, made her stomach clench with anxiety. Winter came to Quartz Hill, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain that turned the dusty streets to mud. Victoria had been in town for 5 months now, and she had settled into a routine that felt almost normal. She helped Mrs. Chen more regularly now, taking on the bookkeeping for the boarding house since she had a good head for figures. She attended church most Sundays. She even exchanged pleasantries with the shopkeepers, though she still could not bring herself to look at their faces. One cold January morning, Mrs. Patterson appeared at the boarding house asking for her. Victoria heard the teacher's voice downstairs and felt a spike of nervousness. She made her way down slowly, eyes on the steps. "Miss Ellis," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "Owen Morgan mentioned you might be interested in helping at the school. I could certainly use an assistant, particularly with the younger children. They need help with reading and arithmetic while I work with the older students." "I do not know if I am qualified," Victoria said hesitantly. "Owen tells me you are well educated and patient. That is all I need. Why do not you come observe for a day and see if it suits you?" Victoria agreed before she could talk herself out of it, and the following Monday she walked to the small schoolhouse at the edge of town, her heart hammering. The building was simple, one room with rows of benches and a wood stove in the corner. Mrs. Patterson introduced her to the students, and Victoria kept her eyes on the floor, feeling heat creep up her neck as she imagined all those children staring at her. But then Clara's voice rang out. "That is Miss Ellis. She is my friend. She knows all the best stories." "Well then," Mrs. Patterson said, "perhaps she can read to the younger children while I work with the older ones on their grammar." Victoria found herself seated on a low chair, with 5 children aged 5 to 8 gathered around her feet. They looked up at her expectantly, and panic fluttered in her chest. But then she focused on the book in her hands, on the familiar words of a fairy tale Clara loved, and she began to read. The children listened, occasionally asking questions or pointing at the pictures, and Victoria realized they did not care that she was not looking at them. They cared about the story, about her voice bringing the words to life. By the end of the day, she was exhausted, but also exhilarated. Mrs. Patterson asked her to come back, and Victoria agreed. Teaching became another part of her routine, another thread tying her to this new life she was building in Quartz Hill. As winter turned to spring, Victoria noticed changes in herself that surprised her. She smiled more easily. She slept better at night. The constant tight feeling in her chest had eased. She still could not look people in the eye, but she had stopped seeing it as a permanent failure. It was just where she was right now, and maybe someday it would change. Her feelings for Owen were changing too, deepening into something that both thrilled and terrified her. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, remembering the way his voice sounded when he laughed, the careful way he moved around skittish horses, the patience in every word he spoke to her. When he arrived for their visits, her heart would lift in a way that had nothing to do with friendship, and everything to do with something far more complicated. She did not know if he felt the same way. He was unfailingly kind and attentive, but he never pushed for more than she could give. Never touched her except for the occasional steadying hand on her elbow. Never suggested that their relationship was anything beyond friendship. But there were moments when his voice would soften in a particular way. Moments when she could feel him looking at her with an intensity that made her skin warm. Moments when the silence between them felt charged with unspoken words. One April afternoon, they were at the ranch and a sudden spring storm rolled in, dark clouds gathering with startling speed. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, and they ran for the barn, laughing breathlessly as they tumbled through the door. Victoria's dress was soaked, her hair falling from its pins, and for a moment she forgot to be guarded. She looked up, still laughing, and her eyes met Owen's. Time seemed to stop. His eyes were gray-green like sage after rain, and they held an expression that made her breath catch. Warmth, admiration, and something deeper that she was afraid to name. She froze, unable to look away, her heart thundering in her chest. "Victoria," he said softly, and just her name in his voice was like a question and a prayer all at once. "I am looking at you," she whispered, as if she could not quite believe it. "I am looking right at you." "I know." He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. "You are beautiful." Tears sprang to her eyes, but they were different tears than before. "I am broken. You are healing. There is a difference. What if I never fully heal? What if I always carry this with me? Then you carry it, and I will be here, helping you carry it for as long as you let me." "Why?" The word came out choked. "Why would you wait for someone like me?" "Because you are worth waiting for. Because from the moment I saw you in town, looking so lost and so brave all at once, I knew you were someone special. Because every day I get to spend with you is a gift." He paused, his hand still gentle against her cheek. "I love you, Victoria. I have loved you for months now. And I will keep loving you whether you can look at me or not, whether you heal quickly or slowly, or not at all. There is no rush, no expectation. I just needed you to know." She could not speak past the lump in her throat, so she did the only thing she could think of. She stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest, and his arms came around her carefully, like she was something precious. They stood like that while the storm raged outside, holding each other, and Victoria felt something inside her chest unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. "I love you too," she finally managed. "I think I have for a while now. I was just too afraid to admit it." She felt his lips brush the top of her head, the gentlest kiss. "No need to be afraid. Not with me." They stayed in the barn until the storm passed, talking quietly about the future, about possibilities. Owen asked if she would consider courting him properly, and Victoria said yes with a certainty that surprised her. When they finally rode back to town, the world looked washed clean, the colors more vivid, the air fresher. Victoria kept stealing glances at Owen, at his profile against the clear evening sky, and each time their eyes met, she felt a jolt of joy that this was real, that he was real, that this new life was hers to claim. The courtship that followed was tender and careful, both of them mindful of Victoria's boundaries. Owen came to town more frequently, taking her on walks around Quartz Hill, introducing her properly to the townspeople. With him beside her, Victoria found it easier to interact with others. She still struggled to maintain eye contact with most people, but she managed brief glances, and that felt like progress. Clara was overjoyed that her uncle and her favorite teacher were courting, and she took credit for bringing them together. "I knew you would fall in love," she announced proudly. "I told Uncle Owen you were perfect for him." Summer arrived with its fierce heat, and the ranch work intensified. Victoria began spending more time there, helping where she could, learning the rhythms of ranch life. She discovered she enjoyed the physical work, the way it tired her body and quieted her mind. She learned to collect eggs from the chickens, to help in the vegetable garden, to assist with the simpler aspects of horse care. The ranch hands accepted her presence with friendly nods and the occasional piece of advice. There was Tom, the oldest at 50, who had been working ranches his whole life. Young Eddie, barely 19, full of enthusiasm and terrible jokes. Miguel, quiet and skilled with the horses, who had come from Mexico 5 years ago. And Hank, middle-aged and steady, who served as foreman and Owen's right hand. They were good men, and Victoria felt safe around them in a way she had not expected to feel safe around men again. One evening in late July, Owen took her to a spot on the ranch she had not seen before, a small rise overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold and amber, and the vista was breathtaking. They sat together on the warm grass, and Owen took her hand. "I want to marry you," he said without preamble. "I know we have not been courting long, but I am sure. I have never been more sure of anything. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to face whatever comes together." He paused, squeezing her hand. "But only if you are ready. Only if you want the same things." Victoria's heart was so full she thought it might burst. "I want that too. All of it. I never thought I would feel this way again, feel hopeful about the future. But you have given that back to me. Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her close and kissed her, slow and sweet, and Victoria kissed him back with all the love and gratitude in her heart. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "When?" he asked. "Soon. I do not want to wait." "Is that all right?" "That is more than all right." They married in September, exactly 1 year after Victoria had arrived in Quartz Hill. The ceremony was small, held in the church with Mrs. Chen, Clara, the ranch hands, Mrs. Patterson, and a handful of townspeople in attendance. The local preacher, Reverend Hall, performed the service. Victoria wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, and Owen wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. When the moment came to say their vows, Victoria looked directly at Owen, holding his gaze steady throughout. She saw his eyes glisten with emotion as she promised to love and honor him as he promised the same to her. Clara cried happy tears, and Tom blew his nose loudly into a handkerchief. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and more food than they could possibly eat. Miguel played guitar, and there was dancing as the sun set and stars emerged. Victoria danced with Owen, with Tom, who was surprisingly graceful, even with young Eddie, who stepped on her toes, but apologized so profusely she could not help but laugh. Later, after the guests had left and Clara had been taken home by Mrs. Chen, who would watch her for a few days, Owen and Victoria stood together on the porch of the ranch house that was now her home. Their home. "Happy?" Owen asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible a year ago," Victoria said honestly. "You saved me, you know, not just that first day, but every day after. You gave me time to heal, space to be broken, and patience to become whole again." "You saved yourself," Owen countered gently. "I just walked beside you while you did it, and I plan to keep walking beside you for the rest of our lives." They went inside together, and Victoria felt no fear, only love and anticipation for this new chapter. The house that had seemed so big and unfamiliar during her first visit now felt warm and welcoming. Owen had prepared the main bedroom with care, filling it with wildflowers and making sure everything was perfect for their wedding night. He continued to be patient with her, letting her set the pace, making sure she felt safe and cherished. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Victoria's eyes. This was what love was supposed to be. Not just passion, but respect and care, and the deep knowledge that you were valued for exactly who you were. The months that followed were busy and fulfilling. Victoria continued teaching at the school, finding joy in watching the children learn and grow. She took on more responsibilities at the ranch, managing the household accounts and helping Owen make decisions about breeding stock and land improvements. Clara was a frequent visitor, spending many weekends at the ranch and cementing her role as Victoria's honorary niece. Victoria's nightmares became less frequent, though they never fully disappeared. Some nights she would wake gasping, and Owen would hold her until the terror passed, murmuring reassurances. She learned to live with the scars, both visible and invisible. The past was part of her, but it no longer defined her entire existence. In the spring of 1880, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and fear in equal measure. Owen was thrilled, already planning improvements to the house and talking about teaching their child to ride. Clara announced that she would be the best cousin ever, and began knitting a baby blanket that was more holes than yarn, but made with absolute love. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Victoria continued teaching until she grew too large to be comfortable standing for long periods. Mrs. Patterson hired another assistant to help, a young woman named Sarah who had moved to Quartz Hill from Nevada. On a cold November morning, Victoria went into labor. Mrs. Chen came to the ranch to assist, along with Dr. Reed from town, a gruff but competent older man. Owen paced the porch, wearing a path in the wood, while Tom and the other ranch hands tried to distract him with talk of horses and weather. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Victoria wondered if she had the strength to continue. But she thought of everything she had survived, everything she had overcome, and she found reserves of determination she had not known she possessed. Finally, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red, her baby entered the world with a lusty cry. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced, wrapping the baby in soft blankets. "A healthy, strong boy." Victoria held her son for the first time, looking down at his tiny red face, his eyes scrunched shut against the light, his small fists waving. Love crashed over her like a wave, so powerful it took her breath away. This was her child, hers and Owen's. A new life created from their love. Owen came in moments later, his face pale with worry, until he saw them both alive and well. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his large hand gentle on the baby's head. "He is perfect," Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you for this gift." "What should we name him?" Victoria asked. They had discussed names for months without settling on anything definite, but looking at their son, Victoria knew exactly what his name should be. "Thomas," she said, "after your brother, so Clara's father is remembered." Owen's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. Thomas Morgan, Tommy for short." Clara arrived the next day and was smitten with baby Tommy, holding him with careful reverence and declaring him the most wonderful baby in the entire world. She read to him from her books, told him stories about the ranch, and promised to teach him everything she knew. The years that followed were full and rich. Tommy grew into a bright, active child with his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's dark hair. He loved the ranch with a fierce passion, following Owen around from the time he could walk, begging to help with every task. Victoria watched her son grow with wonder, amazed that she had created this small person, that she was someone's mother. When Tommy was 3, Victoria became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she carried right up until her due date with minimal discomfort. She gave birth to a daughter in the spring of 1884, a tiny thing with wisps of blonde hair and blue eyes that would eventually turn brown. They named her Margaret after Victoria's mother and called her Maggie. Clara, now 13 and blossoming into a lovely young woman, adored her new cousin and took on the role of big sister with enthusiasm. She would spend entire afternoons with Maggie, singing to her, rocking her, telling her elaborate stories. Victoria was grateful for Clara's help, especially when Tommy was being particularly energetic and demanding. The ranch prospered under Owen's management. He had a gift for breeding quality horses, and the Morgan Ranch became known throughout California for producing animals with excellent temperament and stamina. They expanded their land holdings, hired more ranch hands, and built a larger barn. Victoria managed the business side with skill, her education and natural aptitude for numbers proving invaluable. Life was not without challenges. There were droughts that tested their resources, market fluctuations that affected prices, illnesses that swept through the horses or the cattle. Tommy fell from a horse when he was 6 and broke his arm, giving Victoria several hours of terror until Dr. Reed set the bone and assured them he would heal fine. Maggie developed a high fever when she was 2 that had Victoria sitting up with her for 3 nights straight, praying desperately that she would not lose her daughter. But they weathered each challenge together, Owen and Victoria, a united front against whatever life threw at them. The love between them only deepened with time, maturing into something solid and unshakable. They knew each other's moods and habits, could communicate with a look or a touch, supported each other's dreams and plans. Victoria never fully regained her ability to maintain eye contact with strangers, though she managed it with people she knew well. It became part of who she was, a quirk that the people of Quartz Hill simply accepted. Her students learned to understand that when Miss Victoria looked at the floor or the wall, she was still listening, still cared about what they said. Some of the children even found it easier to talk to her precisely because she was not staring directly at them. Clara graduated from school and, to everyone's surprise, announced her intention to become a veterinarian. It was an unusual ambition for a woman, and it would require leaving Quartz Hill to attend a program in San Francisco, but Owen and Victoria supported her completely. They helped her prepare for the entrance examinations, and when she was accepted, they threw a celebration that the whole town attended. On the night before Clara left for San Francisco, she came to the ranch for a farewell dinner. She was 18 now, poised and confident, so different from the 7-year-old girl who had read fairy tales to a traumatized woman on a boarding house porch. After the children were in bed, Clara sat with Owen and Victoria on the porch they had shared so many conversations on. "I want to thank you both," Clara said, her voice serious, "for everything, for raising me after my father died, for showing me what a good marriage looks like, for supporting my dreams even when they are unconventional." "You never have to thank us," Owen said gruffly. "You are family. We love you. I know, and I love you too. Both of you." Clara looked at Victoria, her eyes shining with affection. "You have come so far, Victoria. Do you realize that? When I first met you, you could barely speak, and now look at you, running a ranch, raising 2 children, teaching half the kids in town. You are the strongest person I know." Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I could not have done any of it without your uncle, without you. You both gave me a reason to keep going when I wanted to give up." "That is what family does," Clara said simply. "We hold each other up." Clara left for San Francisco the next morning, and Victoria cried as the stagecoach pulled away, though they were bittersweet tears. She was sad to see Clara go, but proud of the woman she had become. The years continued to pass. Tommy grew into a capable young man who ran the ranch alongside his father, showing the same patience with animals that Owen possessed. Maggie became a teacher herself, working alongside Victoria at the school and showing a particular gift for working with struggling students. Both children knew the story of what had happened to their mother's family, though Victoria only told them when they were old enough to understand. She wanted them to know where she came from, the darkness she had walked through, so they would understand that tragedy did not have to be the end of the story. Clara finished her studies and returned to Quartz Hill, setting up a practice as the first female veterinarian in the region. She faced skepticism at first, but her skill and dedication quickly won over even the most traditional ranchers. She remained close to the family, spending holidays at the ranch and maintaining her role as favorite cousin to Tommy and Maggie. On a warm September evening in 1895, Owen and Victoria sat on the porch watching the sunset, as they had done countless times over the years. Tommy was in the barn finishing evening chores. Maggie was inside, helping with dinner preparations. The sounds of normal family life filled the air, comfortable and familiar. 17 years, Victoria said softly. 17 years since we met. The best 17 years of my life, Owen replied, taking her hand. His hair was graying now, and there were lines around his eyes, but to Victoria, he was as handsome as the day she had first really looked at him in that barn during a rainstorm. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day? I told you I would wait until you were ready to look. You kept that promise. You waited, even when I am sure other men would have given up, would have moved on to someone less complicated. You waited." Owen turned to face her fully, his eyes holding hers in the fading light. "You were never too complicated. You were hurt, and you deserved time to heal. Anyone who could not see that did not deserve you." "I was so broken," Victoria said, thinking back to that lost girl who had stumbled into town covered in dust and dried blood. I truly believed I would never be whole again. "You are not the same person you were then," Owen agreed. "You are stronger now. Scarred, yes, but not broken. Never broken." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beating of his heart. "I have a good life, a beautiful life, a life I never imagined I could have." "We have a good life," Owen corrected gently. "We built it together." "Yes," Victoria agreed, smiling. "Together." Tommy emerged from the barn, waving at them before heading to wash up. Through the window, they could see Maggie setting the table, her movements efficient and practiced. The smell of roasting chicken drifted from the kitchen, making Victoria's stomach rumble. "Should we go in?" Owen asked. "In a moment. I just want to sit here with you a little longer." So they sat, holding hands, watching as the sun dipped below the hills and the first stars began to appear. A coyote howled in the distance, and the horses nickered softly in their corral. The evening breeze carried the scent of sage and dry grass, the smell of home. Victoria thought about that day 17 years ago, when she had arrived in Quartz Hill, unable to look anyone in the eye, convinced her life was over. She thought about Owen's patience, his steady presence, his willingness to wait for her to heal in her own time. She thought about Clara's friendship, Mrs. Chen's kindness, the community that had accepted her despite her strangeness. Most of all, she thought about the life she had built here, the children she had raised, the students she had taught, the ranch she had helped grow and prosper, the love she had found with a cowboy who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, the future that stretched ahead, full of grandchildren to come and new adventures to share. She had survived the worst day of her life, and she had done more than just survive. She had healed, had loved, had created a family and a home. The scars remained, both the ones people could see and the ones they could not, but they were part of her story now, not the whole story. "I am ready," she said softly. "Ready for dinner?" Owen asked with a smile in his voice. "Ready for that, but I meant ready for whatever comes next, for growing old with you, for watching our children make their own lives, for whatever joys and sorrows the future holds." She squeezed his hand. "I am ready, because I know you will be beside me, just like you promised, just like you have always been." Owen brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Always, Victoria, for all my days." They rose together and walked into the house, into the warmth and light and laughter that waited inside. Tommy and Maggie looked up as they entered, their faces bright and welcoming. Maggie had set the table beautifully, and Tommy was pouring water into glasses with careful concentration. "About time," Maggie teased. "I thought you two were going to stay out there all night." "Just enjoying the evening," Owen said, ruffling his daughter's hair as he passed. They sat down to dinner as a family, talking about their days, making plans for tomorrow, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to wash dishes. Normal, everyday conversation that Victoria treasured precisely because it was so ordinary. This was the life she had fought so hard to build, the peace she had earned through pain and perseverance. After dinner, after the dishes were washed and the children had gone to their rooms, Victoria and Owen prepared for bed. She caught sight of herself in the mirror, a woman in her late 30s with threads of silver beginning to show in her dark hair, lines around her eyes from years of squinting in the sun. She looked like what she was, a ranch wife, a mother, a teacher, someone who had lived a full life. Owen came up behind her, his arms circling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. Their eyes met in the mirror, and Victoria held his gaze steadily, seeing all the love and contentment reflected there. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "Not a single one," she replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They climbed into bed, and Victoria curled into Owen's warmth, his arms secure around her. Through the open window, she could hear the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Horses moving in their stalls, an owl hooting in the distance, the wind sighing through the cottonwoods. She thought about that broken girl who had kept her eyes on the ground, afraid to look up, afraid to hope. She thought about the cowboy who had promised to wait, who had kept that promise without complaint or expectation. She thought about healing and love, and the way tragedy could lead to unexpected joy if you had the courage to keep going. "Owen," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for waiting, for loving me, for this life. Thank you for letting me love you, for taking a chance on a cowboy who did not have much to offer except patience and a ranch. You had everything to offer, Victoria said. You had exactly what I needed. They drifted to sleep together, and for the first time in 17 years, Victoria did not dream of the stagecoach robbery. Instead, she dreamed of the future, of Tommy bringing home a sweetheart to meet his parents, of Maggie's wedding dancing in a white dress, of grandchildren running through the ranch, filling it with laughter and chaos, of growing old with Owen on that porch, watching sunset after sunset year after year. She dreamed of a happy ending that was really just a happy continuation, because life did not end with falling in love. It kept going, kept unfolding, kept offering new joys and challenges. And she would face all of it with Owen beside her, with the family they had built, with the strength she had discovered within herself. The girl who could not meet anyone's eyes had become a woman who looked at life directly, who faced each day with courage and grace. She had been given time to heal, and she had used that time wisely. She had been broken, and she had put herself back together into something stronger than before. And every day for the rest of her life, she would wake up grateful for the cowboy who had said, "Take your time, I will wait until you are ready to look," and who had kept that promise with unfailing love. The years continued to roll forward in Quartz Hill, each season bringing its own rhythm and rewards. In 1897, Tommy fell in love with a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, a spirited young woman named Ruth, who could rope a steer as well as any man, and who made Tommy laugh with her quick wit. The wedding was held at the Morgan Ranch, with half the county in attendance, and Victoria cried happy tears as she watched her son pledge his life to someone who clearly adored him. Ruth fit seamlessly into the family, working alongside Tommy on the ranch and bringing fresh energy to the operation. She and Victoria became close, spending hours talking about everything from horse breeding to recipes to the challenges of being a woman in a man's world. Ruth never questioned Victoria's tendency to look away during conversations, simply accepting it as part of who her mother-in-law was. Maggie continued teaching, but showed no interest in settling down, declaring she was perfectly content with her students and her books. Victoria did not push her, remembering her own journey and knowing that everyone moved at their own pace. If Maggie found love, it would happen when the time was right. Clara's veterinary practice flourished, and she became indispensable to the ranchers and farmers throughout the region. She never married, though she had several suitors over the years, saying she was too busy with her work to bother with romance. Victoria suspected Clara simply had not found anyone who could match her intelligence and independence, but she kept that thought to herself. In the spring of 1898, Ruth gave birth to Victoria and Owen's first grandchild, a healthy boy they named James. Holding her grandson for the first time, Victoria felt the same overwhelming rush of love she had experienced with her own children, mixed with the bittersweet awareness of time's passage. She was a grandmother now, her hair more silver than dark, her hands showing the wear of years of hard work. But she felt blessed beyond measure. James was followed by a daughter 2 years later, Emma, and then another son, Robert, in 1902. The ranch house that had once felt too large now rang with children's voices and laughter. Victoria watched Owen with the grandchildren and fell in love with him all over again, seeing his gentleness and patience with the little ones. He was the same man who had crouched down to speak to a traumatized woman on a street in Quartz Hill, offering time and understanding without expectation. Tommy and Ruth eventually took over most of the ranch operations as Owen began to slow down. He was in his 60s now, his body feeling the effects of decades of hard physical labor, but he remained sharp and engaged, serving as advisor and mentor to his son. Victoria continued teaching part-time, though she had passed the primary responsibility to Maggie and a younger teacher named Helen. The town of Quartz Hill had grown over the years, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. The railroad had come through in 1895, bringing easier access to markets and supplies. The old boarding house where Victoria had first stayed still stood, though Mrs. Chen had passed away in 1900, leaving the property to her daughter. The schoolhouse had been expanded twice to accommodate growing enrollment. The church had a new bell, donated by the congregation in honor of Reverend Hall's 30 years of service. Victoria had become a respected figure in the community, known for her dedication to the children, her business acumen in helping run the Morgan Ranch, and her quiet kindness. People had long since stopped remarking on her tendency to avoid eye contact, seeing it simply as part of Miss Victoria's way. The children she had taught over the years, now grown with families of their own, spoke of her with affection and gratitude. One late summer evening in 1905, Victoria and Owen sat on their porch with Tommy and Ruth, watching the grandchildren play in the yard before bedtime. James was teaching Emma to rope a fence post, while little Robert toddled after them, determined to keep up with his older siblings. The scene was so perfect, so peacefully domestic, that Victoria felt her heart squeeze with joy. "Did you ever imagine this?" Ruth asked, gesturing to the children. "When you were first starting out?" Victoria thought about the question seriously. "When Owen and I married, I hoped for children, but I could not imagine beyond that hope. The future felt too uncertain, too fragile. I was still healing, still learning to live in the world again. And now?" Ruth prompted gently. "Now I cannot imagine any other life. This is where I was meant to be, with these people, in this place." Victoria looked at Owen, who was watching the children with a soft smile. "All because a kind man offered me patience when I needed it most." "You give me too much credit," Owen said. "You did the hard work of healing yourself. But you made it possible. You created a safe space for that healing to happen." Tommy cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable with the emotional conversation, but his eyes were warm. "You both taught me what love should look like: patience, respect, partnership. I try to live up to that example every day with Ruth." "You do wonderfully," Ruth assured him, taking his hand. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, until the sunset colors began to fade and Ruth called the children in to prepare for bed. Tommy and his family lived in a house they had built on the property, close enough to be part of the daily workings of the ranch, but far enough to have their own space. After they left, Owen and Victoria remained on the porch, reluctant to end the perfect evening. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Victoria asked. "When I arrived in town? Sometimes. I remember thinking you looked like a wounded bird, all hunched over and trembling. And I remember feeling this overwhelming need to help you, to protect you, even though I did not know you at all. What made you stop? What made you approach me when everyone else just stared?" Owen considered the question. "I recognize something in you, I think, a kind of pain that goes bone deep. My brother's death had taught me what that looked like, and I knew that what you needed most was not questions or demands, but simply kindness and time. You gave me both, in abundance." "It was not a hardship, Victoria. Even in those early days, I could see the strength in you, the determination to survive. I wanted to know the woman you would become once you felt safe enough to emerge from that protective shell." "And," Victoria asked with a slight smile, "was the reality worth the wait?" Owen pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You exceeded every hope and expectation. You are remarkable, Victoria Morgan. You always have been." They eventually made their way inside and prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routine with the ease of long practice. Victoria thought about how far she had come from that terrified girl who could not bear to look at another human face. She had not only survived her trauma, but had built a rich, full life in spite of it. She had loved deeply, raised children, contributed to her community, and found peace. The nightmares had faded over the years, coming only occasionally now. And when they did, Owen was always there to anchor her back to the present. The anniversary of the robbery still hit her hard each year, but she had learned to acknowledge the grief without letting it consume her. Her family was her strength, and knowing they were safe and loved made even the darkest memories bearable. In 1908, Maggie surprised everyone by announcing her engagement to a widowed rancher named Daniel Foster, who had 2 young children from his first marriage. Daniel was patient and kind, 10 years Maggie's senior, and clearly adored her. Victoria saw echoes of her own relationship with Owen in the way Daniel looked at Maggie, with respect and deep affection. The wedding was small and lovely, held in the church where Victoria and Owen had married 30 years earlier. Clara was there, of course, serving as Maggie's attendant and looking distinguished in her formal dress. She was in her late 40s now, her hair touched with gray, but still energetic and dedicated to her practice. Watching Clara, Victoria felt immense pride in the woman she had become, and gratitude for the friendship that had helped save her all those years ago. As Victoria watched Maggie and Daniel exchange vows, she thought about the continuity of life, the way love persisted and renewed itself, generation after generation. Her children were building their own families now, creating their own stories of love and commitment. The legacy she and Owen were leaving was not just the successful ranch, but the example of what a good marriage could be. The years marched on. Victoria and Owen celebrated their 35th anniversary in 1913, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends. Owen was 72 now, Victoria 62, both of them showing the wear of age but still active and engaged with life. Owen still rode out to check on the horses most days, though he moved more slowly and needed Tommy's help with the heavier work. Victoria still taught reading to a small group of students twice a week, though her eyes tired more easily now, and she needed spectacles for close work. They had achieved something remarkable, a long, happy marriage built on mutual respect and deep love. In an era when many marriages were matters of convenience or necessity, when love was considered a bonus rather than a foundation, they had created a partnership that nourished both of them. They still talked for hours, still held hands while walking, still found joy in each other's company. One crisp autumn morning in 1914, Owen did not come in from his morning ride at his usual time. Victoria felt a flutter of worry, and she sent Tommy out to look for him. Her son returned an hour later, his face grave, and Victoria knew before he spoke what had happened. They found Owen peacefully passed away beside the stream that ran through their property, his horse grazing nearby. The doctor said it was his heart, quick and painless, the kind of death many people prayed for. But that knowledge did nothing to ease the gaping hole in Victoria's chest, the sense that half of herself had been ripped away. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county. Owen had been respected and liked, known for his fairness and integrity. Person after person came to Victoria to share stories of Owen's kindness, his wisdom, his dry sense of humor. Clara held Victoria's hand throughout the service, and Tommy and Maggie stayed close, their own grief evident but contained for their mother's sake. Victoria did not cry during the funeral. She stood straight and still, accepting condolences with quiet grace, her eyes fixed on the simple coffin that held the man she had loved for 36 years. It was only later, alone in their bedroom that still smelled faintly of him, that she finally broke down. She sobbed into his pillow, great wrenching cries that came from the deepest part of her soul. She had survived losing her first family through violence and trauma. Now she had lost her second family's patriarch, not through violence but through the natural order of things, and somehow that made it both easier and harder. Easier because there was no one to blame, no anger to fuel. Harder because there was only the vast, aching emptiness of his absence. The weeks following Owen's death were the darkest Victoria had experienced since those early days in Quartz Hill. She moved through her days mechanically, caring for her grandchildren when they visited, helping with ranch business because it needed to be done, but feeling disconnected from everything. At night, she would lie in their bed alone and remember 36 years of sleeping beside him, of his warmth and steady breathing, of the way he always reached for her hand, even in sleep. Clara visited frequently, sitting with her as she had done all those years ago, offering quiet companionship. Tommy and Ruth invited her to move in with them, but Victoria refused, not ready to leave the house she and Owen had filled with love and laughter. Maggie came by daily, bringing meals and making sure her mother was eating, sleeping, functioning. "I know it does not feel like it now," Maggie said one evening as they sat together, "but you will find your way through this. You are the strongest person I know, Mama. You survived the unspeakable. You can survive this too." "I survived before because your father was beside me," Victoria said, her voice raw. "How do I survive without him?" "Because he would want you to. Because we need you. Because you still have grandchildren to watch grow up, and students who need you, and a life that matters." Victoria knew Maggie was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. Still, she began to try. She returned to teaching, finding some solace in the familiar routine. She spent time with her grandchildren, letting their youth and energy pull her back toward life. She managed the ranch accounts with Tommy, making sure Owen's legacy continued to thrive. Slowly, painfully, she began to heal again. This grief was different from the first, less sharp and traumatic, more like a deep, persistent ache. But she learned to carry it, to integrate it into her life without letting it define her entirely. She could think of Owen now without falling apart, could remember their years together with joy instead of only sorrow, She found herself often on the porch where they had spent so many evenings, and she would talk to him as if he could hear. She told him about the grandchildren's achievements, about ranch business, about town gossip. Sometimes Clara would join her, and they would reminisce about the early days, when Victoria was broken and Owen was patient, and neither of them knew what the future would hold. "He loved you so much," Clara said one evening. "From the very beginning. I remember him talking about you before you even knew you would fall in love. He would get this look in his eyes, this soft expression, and I knew he was thinking about you." "I loved him just as much," Victoria said quietly. "He saved my life in every way a person can be saved." "You saved each other," Clara corrected gently. "That is what love does." Victoria lived for another 8 years after Owen's death, years filled with the continued growth of her family. Tommy and Ruth had a 4th child, a daughter they named Victoria, after her grandmother. Maggie and Daniel's family thrived, his children from his first marriage fully embracing Maggie as their mother. The grandchildren grew into capable young people, some staying to work the ranch, others pursuing education and careers in growing cities. In the spring of 1922, Victoria woke one morning feeling tired in a way that had nothing to do with age or activity. She was 81 years old, and she had lived a full, rich life. She had loved deeply, survived tragedy, built a family, and made a difference in her community. She had done everything she had set out to do and more. She spent that day visiting with her children and grandchildren, accepting their concern with gentle reassurance. That evening, Maggie stayed with her, sensing something Victoria had not put into words. They sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of orange and gold. "I am ready," Victoria said softly. Maggie took her hand. "Ready for what, Mama?" "To rest, to be with your father again." Victoria looked at her daughter with clear eyes. "Do not be sad. I have had a wonderful life, far better than I ever imagined possible. But I am tired, Maggie, and I miss him." Tears streamed down Maggie's face, but she nodded. "I understand." That night, Victoria lay down in the bed she had shared with Owen for so many years, and she closed her eyes. She thought about the girl she had been, unable to look anyone in the eye, convinced her life was over. She thought about the cowboy who had promised to wait, who had loved her with patience and steadiness. She thought about their children, their grandchildren, the legacy of love they had created together. And as she drifted into sleep, she could have sworn she felt Owen's hand close around hers, warm and familiar, and heard his voice saying the words he had spoken so long ago. "Take your time. I will wait until you are ready." Victoria Morgan passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by love and leaving behind a family that would carry forward the lessons she and Owen had taught. That patience is a form of love, that healing is possible, that even the darkest tragedy can lead to unexpected joy, and that a life lived with courage and compassion is a life well lived. Her funeral was attended by 4 generations of the Morgan family, along with former students, friends, and neighbors. They buried her beside Owen on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they had built together. And on her headstone, beneath her name and dates, they carved a simple inscription that captured the essence of her life. She looked down, and he waited. Together, they built a life of love. The ranch continued to thrive under Tommy's management, passing eventually to his children and then to their children. The Morgan name became synonymous with quality horses and integrity, a reputation that lasted for generations. And always the story was told of the great-great-grandmother who had arrived in Quartz Hill unable to meet anyone's eyes, and the great-great-grandfather who had loved her enough to wait until she was ready to look, teaching generations to come that true love is patient, kind, and enduring.